Peter Kiernan, when did America lose its mojo? What happened?
Well, I think during the 60s things were tough, but the bright red line for me was the 1973 Arab oil embargo. That was the moment that we lost control of a vital asset that we'd been able to control for a long time. We dictated a lot of the production in the Middle East. The American people then faced oil at $3 a barrel, if you can imagine such a thing. That was really the beginning of the beginning.
But how does one measure mojo? Is it GDP? Because in any capitalist society, it's going to go up and down because we have feel-good decades and then we have decades where the country doesn't feel so good.
Right. I think how you feel is really not going to be the key. I think numbers like job reports are not going to be the key. Look for the aspirations. When you go and ask people, what do you aspire to be? Most Americans today still, even many who are not in the middle class, aspire to a middle class life. They aspire to have a good job, have a good house, have a car, give education to their kids if they can afford it, live for a retirement that's pleasurable, but more important than any of that, the confidence that their kids are going to be better off than they are. That's how I measure mojo. That's what's slipping in this country today.
Well, let's talk about the erosion of the middle class, because that really is the topic of your book. Was it China? Was it technology? What really costs us the jobs in the middle class?
Well, I think more than anything else was lethargy. Technology came in like a great wave, but that was a wave that was offshore for quite a while. We could see industry after industry being disrupted, as they are today. In wholly new ways, products and services were delivered. So we make up about 10% more steel today than we did in 1980, but we do it with 25% of the employees. That happened in every company, every industry that you can imagine. What did we do about it? Did we reposition our workers? Did we train them for the new jobs or the good jobs? Or did we just sort of let things happen and the tide come in and the tide come out? I'm afraid we did the latter. We didn't anticipate, and when it was in the middle of the storm, we didn't adjust and adapt.
And what about unions? After World War II, unions were very strong. We had a whole lot of output, which you discuss in the book. That said, we've seen unions decline. Has that caused the decimation of the middle class, or is that just, once again, due to technology?
Well, unions have certainly declined, as you say, in the corporate sphere, but in the public sector, unions are bigger than they've ever been. But in the corporate sector, what's really put the pressure, frankly, on jobs is the emergence of tigers all over the globe, countries with interests in creating their own economy. So you look, Brazil, for example, recently blew by Britain to become the #7 economy. That there are countries out there that are growing. So most people know that China's #1 in population and India's #2, both over 1 billion. Way, way down is us at 320. Most people don't know what's happened on the next 5. There's been change on the leaderboard. It's Indonesia, Brazil, Pakistan, Nigeria, Bangladesh. Those are the next 5 countries in size, all with smaller economies, but economies growing much faster than our own.
So how does the U.S. compete with those countries where the wages are so much less and get our name back at the top of that leaderboard? Because we're going to hear a lot of things on the campaign trail going forward over the next year that we're going to get that middle class back. What do you say?
I think a seminal issue is the one you just raised, that the OECD forecasts in the next 10 years 1 billion new members of the world's middle class outside our borders. Well, if we're going to serve that group, who knows better than the United States and Americans how to serve a growing middle class with products and services they desire? If you look at healthcare in Asia, for instance, excluding Japan, healthcare runs about 4% of the GDP of those countries. It's close to 20%. So we're 5 times as much. If I'm sure of anything, it's that the GDP percentage of healthcare in those nations is going to grow. We have something approaching a gold standard in healthcare services. We should export that. We should turn that into a power and drive our middle class through serving the growing middle class of the world.
But here's the question, though. If you're talking about teaching the emerging markets to fish, they're going to be able to do it for themselves. They're no longer going to need our American expertise. Does that really still solve the middle class problem over here if we're teaching them to do it over there?
Yes, I think it's the only way we can do it because there simply isn't enough growth at home to feed the size of the middle class we have right now. So there are domestic policy ostriches who stick their head in the sand and say, we're going to solve the problem just within our borders. I'm saying it can't be done. I'm saying you have to go and embrace the overseas opportunity. And by the way, if you do, take General Motors. General Motors a couple of years ago sold 9 million cars. It was the turnaround of the decade. Remember, they were at death's door. They turned around and sold 9 million cars. Of those 9 million, 2.5 million sold to China. Brazil has become one of the biggest car markets in the world. Feeding these tigers is the way out for our middle class.
And do you subscribe to opening up trade? Clearly there's a big trade debate going on. You have a lot of Democrats here who want to be more protectionist. They say we're not getting a fair deal over there. Do you say just rip it open and let everyone the most free trade possible?
Well, I don't think we're particularly good at trade, in my opinion. And when we talk about free trade or fair trade, usually it's unfair to us. I'm not a big fan of the current TPP that's being planned. I think what China and some of these other nations do better that we ought to take as a lesson is one-on-one bilateral trade negotiations. They will go in and do a $30 billion trade deal with Ukraine, and when we're trying to put sanctions on Russia, say, don't worry about it. Just send us the natural gas our way. Same thing with Iran. That what China does very effectively is this bilateral one-on-one trade negotiation. We're stuck in this TPP with 12 nations, and if you take out the U.S., Canada, Australia, and Japan, what you're left with is, Brunei and Vietnam. These are not exactly trading powers. I think they're interesting to develop trading partnerships with, but the TPP is not the solution.
And then finally, of all the candidates on the campaign trail, which one of them do you think will get America's mojo back the fastest?
Well, you're raising a fascinating point, because I've listened very carefully because of my book. Which of the candidates embraces as a centerpiece of their strategy the American middle class? And it wouldn't surprise you that every single one of the God knows how many Republicans and every single one of the Democrats is claiming that they are going to be the true champion of the middle class. And what I'm not hearing from any of them, what my book I think is helpful to, is push them to come up with answers. We have a few people who say tax the rich. I say, great. What are you going to do with the cash? Once you get the cash from the 1%, what are you going to do with the money? I think asking those kind of questions is the way you can kind of bubble up the answer to that question, because right now everyone's champion of the middle class. Just ask them.
All right. Thanks for coming on and talking about it.
So nice to be with you again.
Thank you for watching The Street.